Like an egg, we all start in a fragile place, full of potential, yet unformed. Whether it's planning your first international trip or launching a travel page, greatness begins when we nurture what's inside us. You know, one of the most overlooked truths in life is that everything meaningful starts before anyone sees it. Power begins in obscurity. Every great journey, every transformation, every act of creation, whether it's personal growth, a business, or even a complete reinvention of yourself, starts inside the shell. Think of the egg. It's simple, even fragile on the outside, but inside there's a universe of potential, quietly taking form. No one applauds it. No one notices it. It's unseen, uncelebrated. But it's happening, complex, critical development under pressure and in silence. That's how it begins for every one of us. Before the crowd, before the stage, before the flight, you're alone, sitting in your shell, trying to understand who you are, what you're capable of, and what it might cost you to step into the world. That shell can be comforting, but it can also be deceiving. It gives the illusion of safety. You think, I'll stay here a little longer. I'll wait until I'm ready. But you're never really ready in the way you imagine. Because readiness doesn't come from thinking more. It comes from growing into the pressure, embracing it. The egg doesn't crack because of some external invitation. It cracks because something inside refuses to stay small. There's a force within that's willing to endure the risk of breaking, because staying in the dark is no longer an option. Psychologically, we live in this tension every day. We're torn between security and emergence, between the part of us that wants comfort and the part of us that's desperate to evolve. And that's where the real battle happens, not out there in the world, but right here, internally. The shell is a metaphor for every excuse you've ever made. I don't have enough experience. What if I fail? What will people think? It's the internalized fear of visibility. It's the lie that says, stay small, stay safe. But growth doesn't happen in safety. Growth happens in discomfort and chaos, in the unknown. When you step out, when you allow the shell to crack, whether it's by moving to a new country, launching something without permission, or simply deciding to stop apologizing for your dreams, you expose yourself to risk, yes, but also to reality. And that's where the transformation occurs. That's where life begins. There's a psychological law at play here. Carl Jung talked about it in terms of individuation. He said we must integrate the unconscious into the conscious, that we must bring what's hidden in the dark into the light if we ever hope to become whole. That's what cracking the shell really means. It's not just about chasing success. It's about becoming aware of who you are beneath the layers. The real self, the one with the potential to change your life, and maybe even the lives of others. But let me be clear, this process is painful. It involves confronting things you'd rather not look at. It demands honesty, humility, and often a level of discomfort that feels almost unbearable. But what's the alternative? To stay undeveloped, to remain untested, to settle for a version of yourself that was never meant to last? That's not safety. That's decay dressed up as comfort. And yet, this is where many people stop. They feel the pressure building, they sense the cracks forming, but they pull back. They patch the shell. They tell themselves a story that makes it okay to stay hidden. But deep down, they know there's something more inside, waiting. And if you're listening to this and it resonates, it's probably because part of you knows too. So the challenge is this: will you honor what's growing inside of you, or will you silence it for the sake of ease? Because in the end, you're not just protecting yourself by staying in the shell, you're also preventing the world from receiving a version of you that was born to lead, to build, to fly. Break the shell. The silence was for your growth, but the world is waiting for your voice. Hey, the shell doesn't crack from the outside, it cracks from within. It's our inner drive, passion, and struggle that lead to transformation. The pain of growth is real, but so is the power that follows. People often assume that pressure is the enemy, something to be avoided, escaped, or managed. But the truth is, pressure is not the enemy. It's the catalyst. It's the refining force. It's what initiates the transformation. And paradoxically, it's not what comes from outside that changes us most deeply. It's what builds up from within. You take the egg again, that simple symbol. From the outside, it's sealed. Still, but the real story is unfolding inside. The pressure starts mounting. Life begins to demand space. Growth reaches a tipping point where it can no longer be contained. And the result? It cracks. Not because someone broke it from the outside, but because the pressure from within became too much to suppress. That's not destruction. That's breakthrough. We see this mirrored in our own lives all the time. You feel the pressure rising internally. It shows up as restlessness, as anxiety, as frustration with your circumstances, your job, your relationships, even yourself. And instead of paying attention to that pressure, most people numb it, distract themselves, rationalize it away. But that's dangerous because pressure ignored becomes potential wasted. Pressure unexamined becomes chaos, personal chaos, social chaos, generational chaos. Here's the key. Pressure isn't a punishment. It's a signal. It's the psyche telling you, you've outgrown this container. You've stayed too long in a role that no longer challenges you. You've settled into an identity that no longer reflects who you are. You've compromised your values, and your soul is trying to get your attention. And if you ignore that signal long enough, the pressure won't just crack your shell, it will rupture your life. You'll start to feel fragmented, disoriented, even resentful, because deep down, you know you're meant for more, and yet you've accepted less. You've agreed to remain small, because small feels manageable, predictable. But here's the brutal irony. The very thing we avoid, the pressure, is the thing most capable of giving our life meaning. Let's talk about meaning for a moment. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian neurologist and Holocaust survivor, wrote that suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds a meaning. That's a staggering statement, and it suggests that the pain you feel under pressure is. Teaches suffering for its own sake. It's an invitation to reorder your life around something deeper than comfort. But this takes courage. It takes responsibility. You have to voluntarily walk into discomfort, into challenge, into uncertainty. You have to let go of what's no longer serving you. That's not easy. In fact, it's terrifying, but psychologically speaking, is necessary. The archetypal hero's journey always begins with this moment when the call to transformation becomes. The mistake we make is thinking we can have the transformation without the pressure, that we can hatch into a new version of ourselves without cracking something open, without letting go of the old frame. But that's not how it works. The pressure is part of the process. It's the tension that stretches your capacity. It's what reveals what you're actually made of. In fact, the more meaningful your pursuit, the greater the pressure you'll face. The higher the vision, the heavier the responsibility. And that's not a flaw in the system. That's the system working as intended. Because the only way to become someone capable of holding more is to go through what forces you to grow. So the question becomes, how do you respond to pressure? Do you shrink under it, or do you allow it to wake something up in you? Do you run from it, or do you sit with it long enough to learn what it's asking of you? Because pressure isn't here to crush you. It's here to call you up, to crack the shell, to stretch your limits, to initiate your evolution. If you resist it, you prolong your stagnation. But if you engage it, if you cooperate with it, it becomes the very force that sharpens your identity, clarifies your mission, and compels you into forward motion. And maybe that's the deeper truth. The pressure you feel right now isn't a problem to be solved. It's a sign that you're getting close to something that matters. Let it break you open, just like a shell guards what's precious. Protect your mindset. Your thoughts shape your reality. Think bold, think global, and think beyond borders. Let your mind carry you where fear never dares. One of the most underestimated forms of self-destruction is neglecting the mind. People obsess over diets, over appearance, but they often give their thoughts the very instrument through which they interpret the world little to no attention. And yet, everything you do, every decision you make, every goal you set or abandon begins in the mind. The shell protects life. The mind protects meaning. If your thinking is corrupt or weak or undisciplined, then the shell cracks prematurely, or worse, it never opens at all. The problem is, most people walk around with unguarded minds. They consume everything: news, noise, narratives, without discernment. They allow negativity, envy, fear, and self-hatred to take root without realizing those ideas shape their self-perception and eventually their actions. What you allow into your mind is what you will start to believe. And what you believe is what you'll begin to embody. There's no way around that. Now, you might think your thoughts are private, that they stay locked inside. But the mind leaks. Your posture, your tone, your goals, your relationships, they all betray the condition of your internal world. A neglected mind will always show itself eventually. That's why it matters so much to protect it, not in the paranoid sense, but in the philosophical sense. You are what you continually expose yourself to. This is where the metaphor of the shell becomes even more profound. See, the shell isn't just a womb, it's a filter. It allows for growth, but limits invasion. If the shell cracks too early, or if it's too thin, life can't develop. Similarly, if your mind is too open to every passing opinion, if it lacks boundaries, you can't develop either. You'll be too scattered, too reactive. You'll believe things that are convenient instead of things that are true. And this is a real danger in the modern age. We're surrounded by an infinite stream of opinions, distractions, ideologies. Some of it's helpful, but most of it is not. And the tragedy is, people are shaping their lives around borrowed beliefs. Scripts they didn't write, fears they didn't examine, goals they don't even really want. That's a kind of psychological theft. Your life is too precious to live according to the noise, so the solution, guard your thoughts like they matter, because they do. Build a fortress around your mind, not to keep ideas out, but to test them before letting them in. Think critically. Ask yourself, is this belief serving me? Is it true? Or is it simply familiar? Familiarity is not truth. You can be used to dysfunction. You can be comfortable in self-doubt. You can normalize failure if your thoughts haven't been challenged. The mind must be trained, not coddled, not left alone, trained. And training means discipline. It means consuming information that elevates you, not just entertains you, reading deeply, questioning your assumptions. Most importantly, it means confronting the parts of your thinking that are immature or self-sabotaging and being ruthless about correcting them. The psychologist Aaron Beck, who helped pioneer cognitive behavioral therapy, taught that distorted thinking leads to distorted living. If you believe you're powerless, you'll never act with authority. If you believe you're unwanted, you'll sabotage connection. If you believe growth is reserved for others, you'll unconsciously reject every opportunity to become more. And it all starts in the mind, What you protect in your mind, you preserve in your life. That's why you can't afford to let your thoughts go unchecked. Not if you're serious about evolving, not if you truly believe you were made for more. There's a level of mental discipline that doesn't just keep you stable, it makes you dangerous in the best sense. Dangerous to mediocrity, to false narratives, to anything that tries to limit what you're becoming. And make no mistake, the world doesn't just need kind people. It needs people with sharp minds and strong spirits, people who know who they are, and refuse to be mentally colonized by whatever the culture is selling that day. Because if you don't protect your mind, someone else will use it for their agenda. And if you let that happen long enough, you won't even remember what you really wanted in the first place. So train your mind, guard it, sharpen it, because the world will mirror the quality of your thinking. The egg never knows the sky until it breaks open. Whether stepping into a new country or starting a new hustle, courage is the first flight. Don't fear the crack. That's where your wings begin. There comes a moment when the comfort of the known becomes more dangerous than the risk of the unknown. A moment when the fear of staying the same outweighs the fear of change. That's the threshold. That's the line between potential and purpose, between who you've been and who you could be. And crossing that line always demands courage, real, tested, conscious courage. It's tempting to think of courage as a sudden burst of energy, like a dramatic leap off a cliff as some bold new, but more often it's quieter than that. It's the willingness to face the discomfort of the unfamiliar. It's choosing growth over predictability, even when that growth feels awkward or even humiliating at first. Courage isn't loud, it's consistent, and it usually starts with a whisper inside that says, there's more to you than this. Psychologically speaking, what keeps people stuck is rarely a lack of opportunity. It's a failure to respond to that whisper. That internal signal gets overridden by the mind's addiction to control, to certainty, to repetition. The familiar becomes a prison, and people decorate it to look like home. But let's be honest, just because you've made peace with your cage doesn't mean you belong inside it. There's a deeply rooted part of the human psyche, call it the explorer archetype, that craves expansion. It doesn't just want to survive, it wants to seek. It wants to understand. And if you don't honor that drive, it turns on you. That's when you start to feel depressed, numb, anxious, like life is just passing by while you go through the motions. That's the explorer within you screaming from the inside. This isn't it, but stepping into the unknown feels dangerous for a reason. The unknown is dangerous. It's chaotic, unstructured, full of real risk, but it's also where life expands. It's where character is forged. You don't discover your capabilities in comfort, you discover them in conditions that require more of you than you've ever accessed before. The egg never knows the sky of the sky. The egg never knows the sky. It only knows the dark, warm familiarity of the shell. But staying there forever means death. Life is movement. It's progression. And every meaningful transition, every reinvention, relocation, or resurrection of your identity requires you to hatch, to leave the shell. Not because it's failing, but because you've outgrown it. This is where the philosophical component becomes essential, because you have to decide what kind of person you're going to be. Are you someone who waits for the world to push you, or someone who chooses to evolve voluntarily? The first leads to bitterness. The second leads to strength. Nietzsche wrote that the individual must become who he is. Not discover, not stumble upon, but become, which implies effort, intention, a refusal to remain static. The kind of becoming isn't automatic. It requires conscious confrontation with your limitations, and then the decision to move anyway, to walk into the territory that's not yet mapped in your mind. The unknown isn't just physical, it's internal. It's facing the parts of yourself you haven't developed, the talents you've ignored, the disciplines you've avoided. To hatch into the unknown means to accept that you don't yet know who you could be, but you're willing to find out. And that willingness is rare, because it means letting go of control. It means entering a space where you might fail, might be seen, might get it wrong. But it also means entering a space where you might finally get it right. And that's the trade-off: safety or significance, familiarity or expansion. You can't have both. Not at the same time. The tragedy is not that people fear the unknown. That's human. The tragedy is that many never give themselves permission to meet who they'd become if they crossed into it. They forfeit the future because they're too loyal to the past. But if you feel something in you stirring, a frustration with mediocrity, a hunger for something more, a quiet revolt against your own comfort, listen to it. That's not recklessness. That's evolution demanding movement. You were not made to sit in the shell forever. You were made to rise, to risk, to explore what lies beyond what you've known. So take the step. Let the shell fall and meet yourself in the sky. Staying in the shell feels safe, but you weren't made to stay hidden. You were made to fly, to explore, to inspire. The world is waiting for the real you. Break free and show up. Once the shell cracks, once you've responded to the pressure, guarded your mind, and chosen to step into the unknown, there's still one final critical element that determines whether you'll truly take flight or simply circle the same patterns in a different sky. And that's direction. The egg hatches not just to escape the shell, but to move toward a purpose. The bird is born not to exist, but to fly. And this is where most people falter. They break through, yes. They leave the familiar. They embrace discomfort. But then what? They have no compass, no North Star, no vision that organizes their energy. And so they burn out. They wander. They get caught in cycles of overthinking, underachieving, and chronic distraction. Because movement without direction is not progress, it's just noise. Psychologically, we need purpose like the body needs oxygen. Purpose gives structure to chaos. It gives suffering meaning. It transforms daily repetition into something sacred. Without it, even success feels empty. And that's something we're seeing more and more in the modern world. People are achieving more than ever. More money, more exposure, more options, and yet they're miserable, anxious, overwhelmed. Why? Because they're moving, but they don't know where they're going. In philosophy, this problem is ancient. The Greeks talked about telos, an ultimate aim, an end toward which all things strive. Without telos, you live reactively. You bounce from stimulus to stimulus, desire to desire, hoping that the next thing will finally make you feel whole. But it won't, because you haven't asked the fundamental question, what am I for? Not just what do I want, but what am I here to build, to endure, to embody? That's a serious question, one that requires stillness, honesty, and vision. And it's uncomfortable, because the moment you name your direction, you become accountable to it. You can no longer pretend not to know. You can no longer excuse your inaction. Purpose limits you in the best possible way. It narrows your options so your life can deepen. And that depth is where meaning is found. But don't confuse direction with destination. You may not know exactly where you'll end up, and that's okay. The goal isn't to control every outcome. The goal is to align your action with your values, your gifts, and your conscience. Because when you do, life starts to respond. Opportunities appear, relationships shift, energy multiplies. But it only happens when you move with intent. In that sense, purpose isn't something you find. It's something you choose and then refine. You start with what you know. Maybe it's a desire to serve, to create, to challenge, to lead, and you walk in that direction. You let it teach you, you let it stretch you, and as you grow, your purpose matures. It sharpens. It calls more out of you than you thought was there. And here's where the egg mentality completes its cycle. Because purpose is what turns a cracked shell into a launch pad. It's what transforms pressure into preparation. It's what makes the unknown bearable. You're not just surviving the process. You're aiming your life at something
worthy of the suffering. You don't need to have it all figured out, but you do need to choose. You need to stand up internally and declare, this is a direction I'm willing to suffer for. And when you do that, when you finally commit, not with your mouth, but with your habits, your calendar, your energy, you stop floating. You start flying, because meaning isn't a product of perfection. It's a product of direction. It's built day by day, step by step, through the quiet, unglamorous decision to keep showing up for what matters, even when no one is watching, even when you're tired, even when it would be easier to turn around. The sky doesn't belong to the talented. It belongs to the committed. So take your cracked shell, your pressure, your trained mind, your courage, and aim it at something real, something noble. Because if you don't choose your purpose, the world will assign you one, and it will never be worthy of who you really are.